Welcome back to Endemic Times. Today we are talking about the children that are suffering around the world because of war. In a startling reveal, Save the Children has released a report on the amount of children that are living and growing up in countries overtaken by war and conflict. In 2021, the amount of children living in conflict-affected countries increased by 10% in 1 year. I'm going to be covering this report extensively because there is a lot that needs to be brought to the surface and discussed. We cannot forget these poor souls and casualties of war that have no choice in their situation. So let's take a look. In 2021, approximately 1.6 billion children were living in a conflict-affected country, meaning in a country where conflict incidents have occurred. More children are growing up in war today than 30 years ago, as can be seen here. There are 3 levels of intensity: high, medium, and low. As we can see, the amount of children from 1990 to 2021 has increased dramatically, along with the number of children at risk of conflict compared to battle deaths. As you can see here, the number of children at risk has been increasing with a very slight decline, but the gap between children and battle-related deaths is still huge. Approximately 449 million children, which is 1 out of 6, lived in a conflict zone in 2021. In high-intensity conflict countries where more than 1,000 battle-related deaths occur in 1 year, around 230 million children lived in those countries. Africa, a region with the greatest number of children affected by conflict, had around 180 million children living in conflict zones. In the Middle East, 1/3 of children were living in conflict zones in 2021, which is a higher proportion than any other region. The UN Security Council details 6 types of grave violations against children in conflict, which is killing and maiming of children, recruitment and use of children by armed forces or armed groups, abductions, attacks on schools or hospitals, denial of humanitarian access, and rape or other sexual violence against children. In 2021, there was a reported 24,515 grave violations against children. As with the rest of the many trends we are going to see, this graph here shows how over the last 10 years, the grave violations against children has increased in every single area. The thing to keep in mind here is that this is not just what is reported. So while there has been what looks like a slight decline in some of these violations against children, these are still only reported numbers, and they could be much higher. In 2021, the average number of children being killed or injured in a day was 22, which is a slight decrease from previous years, but still depressingly high. When it comes to humanitarian access from 2019 to 2021, there has been a sharp increase from previous years. In this report, they detail many areas that are seeing increases in children living in war or conflict-affected areas. These here are the 10 worst conflict-affected countries for children in 2021. Yemen, Afghanistan, and the Democratic Republic of Congo top the list of the 10 worst conflict-affected countries to be a child in 2021. We will get into the specific countries and numbers in just a minute, but here's a quick look at the number of children killed and maimed in these 10 conflict-affected countries. The yellow bar indicates the number of people killed in battle deaths, and the red is children that were killed and maimed. As we can see, this is devastating, and not just the numbers of children that are being killed and maimed, but the adults that are losing their lives as well. This is putting children and families at a greater risk when they lose a loved one that could very well have been the breadwinner. To see this amount of casualties is absolutely heartbreaking. The worst conflict-affected country to be a child in 2021 is, not surprisingly, Yemen. Children are suffering from all of the 6 grave violations with very little to no accountability mechanisms, along with the severe economic decline that the country and surrounding areas continue to deal with. From March 2015 to September of 2021, there has been 23,000 airstrikes in Yemen, making that approximately 10 airstrikes a day, and has resulted in the killing or injuring of 18,000 civilians. There were 89 incidents of attacks on and military use of schools and hospitals, the highest recorded number since 2015. In Afghanistan, 633 children were killed and over 1,700 children were maimed bringing the total number of cases to 2,356. And these casualties occurred before the Taliban takeover on August 15th of 2021. The Democratic Republic of Congo has been identified as the third worst conflict country to be a child in 2021. In 2021, the highest number of children recorded as being killed or maimed was 474, which is the highest number reported in the country. For over a decade, Somalia has been recording as many as 847 children as killed and maimed, with 793 cases verified in 2021. As mentioned earlier, one of the grave violations that can occur against children in conflict zones is the destruction of schools and/or hospitals. From 2020 to 2021, the number of recorded attacks on schools and hospitals increased by 13%. Schools especially are known for being some of the more safe havens for children in these war-torn conflict regions. It's the one place for community, solace, and a place of learning and expansion. For any school to be attacked is grave, but that these amounts are increasing at this level is astonishing. Because when schools go, it puts children, especially boys, at a much higher risk of becoming child soldiers. In the Central African Republic, the number of attacks on schools and hospitals increased from 22 in 2019 to 114 in 2021. In Mali in 2021, 153 verified attacks occurred on schools and/or health personnel, and one on a military purpose facility. Myanmar reached a record high of 80 incidents in 2021, and sadly, according to the Education Under Attack of 2022, 40% of all incidents reported globally of military use of schools, universities, and other facilities occurred in Myanmar. In Burkina Faso, which has only been part of the UN annual report since 2020, they have seen a total of 227 children verified as killed or maimed in 2021, which is an increase from 54 the previous year. In Palestine, over 1,200 children were victims of killing or maiming, with 88 being recorded as killed, 59 of them by airstrikes carried out by Israeli forces during the horrific May 2021 hostilities in Gaza. With all of this loss of life, you may be asking the question of why is this something that you have not heard of before, or why isn't this being discussed on mainstream media? That is a very good question, and the reason why these catastrophic deaths and destruction have not been discussed is because of the fact that Ukraine has been sucking all of the air out of the room when it comes to media coverage. This graph here shows how between January and the end of September of this year, 2022, Ukraine received 5 times more media coverage than the combined coverage of the 10 worst conflict-affected countries to be a child in 2021. I repeat, that is the combined coverage of these 10 worst conflict-affected countries. Over this same period, media coverage of the conflict in Yemen, which topped the list as the worst conflict country to be a child, was just 2.3% of the media coverage given to the Ukraine conflict. This means that 7 months of mainstream media coverage in 2022 was on Ukraine, surpassing any coverage of the 10 worst conflict-affected countries to be a child in 2021. And it's not like this information has not been available to mainstream media. I have covered extensively here on this channel the atrocities, the death, and destruction that is occurring in almost every one of these countries. Most recently, my video on Somalia covering the fact that a famine has still not been declared in the region despite every factor being met. And one person even commented, "What do you want me to do about it?" My general response at that time was just simply that we should have this information. But what I hadn't quite realized until I was reading this report is that the media's role in what is covered has a huge impact on the overall human response to a situation. So when Ukraine was getting the level of media coverage it was getting over 7 months in just this year, it had a huge effect on community perception and the ability for them to obtain aid. And that is why we need to keep ourselves informed as much as possible in these areas where mainstream media is failing us. They make it a point to say in this report that Ukraine should be seen as a lesson as to what is possible when there is a collective political and financial will. The international community's ability to collectively come together and ensure quick and effective funding has been demonstrated by the support given to Ukraine and all the subsequent provisions that continue. Mainstream media coverage plays a critical role in what people care about. So when they fail to provide any semblance of coverage on these many nations where children are being affected by war, something they were quick to cover and continue to when it comes to Ukraine, shows the insidiousness of media and their role. As we see here, the humanitarian requirements for the 10 most affected conflict areas compared to Ukraine and the corresponding coverage for each shows the disparity in humanitarian response. We can see that Ukraine has received over 80% of their requirements. In previous videos where I have said that the Ukraine war and response in humanitarian aid is affecting much more devastated regions, I wasn't lying. This here shows how much aid has been given to Ukraine based on their targets. Ukraine has received an inordinate amount compared to these regions that have been suffering for longer, with higher deaths of children and civilians. It is this disparity that is keeping these struggling regions in their current situations that are getting worse by the day. This is why we have to care what media does or does not talk about, because of the role that it plays in the bigger picture. Yemen and Afghanistan are receiving more in response to those people that are in need that have been targeted by a humanitarian response. However, we can see here that in places like the Democratic Republic of Congo, Syria, Nigeria, and especially Myanmar, those in need is so much higher than those that have been targeted with a response. One of the biggest aims of this channel is to discuss and expose the level of propaganda that is happening in our mainstream media. When I look at a report such as this that covers in such detail the atrocities and loss of life of innocent children that is not being discussed ad nauseum on mainstream compared to things like Ukraine or Twitter or the most recent celebrity gossip, I get so enraged because while this stuff isn't sexy and sensational, it's real. It's real people with a real human struggle that would likely not be taking place if it wasn't for the United States. So I am going to continue to discuss the issues that mainstream wants to keep hidden. Someone needs to stand up for these people that are too busy just trying to make it to another day. Well, thank you so much for watching. I hope you liked this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell for when I have new videos coming out. If you would like to see any of the videos related to the food crisis, the drought, and the children that are being affected by these wars, you can check out these playlists right here. And as always, remember to stay safe, take care, and be kind to each other.